Hi, welcome back to ITC561. Today we're going to look at topic 7, cloud management. We've started to put our stuff in the cloud. Now we have to manage it. So this is where, once we've put that stuff up there, all those different resources, for whatever reason our organisation or enterprise has decided to move into the cloud. Once they're there, we need to set them up, configure them, maintain them and manage them. So this becomes the normal day-to-day job that a sysadmin would have in an enterprise data center, except now you're working in the cloud. So that means we also really need to understand the delivery model that the cloud provider is using. And so as a result of that, we really don't need to understand the service level agreement to exactly understand precisely what we're going to get from the provider for each of the services that we are using. So let's start to look at some of the things involved here. Again, there's a fair amount of reading in this topic, most of the topics really. These are all items you expect to know about. Now, there's some really good chapters on cloud management in the textbook, and I'd recommend to you chapters 9 on cloud management mechanisms, chapter 14 on cloud delivery model considerations, 15 on cost metrics and pricing models, and 16 on service quality metrics and SLAs. You need to concentrate though on 9 and 14, cloud management mechanisms and cloud delivery model considerations. Cost metrics and pricing models, service quality metrics and SLAs you need to know about, but that is more professional knowledge that you will use in your workplace rather than something you're going to be required to talk about in an exam. That doesn't mean to say you can skip it. You need to scan it. You need to go through it as well. Okay? You don't need to give it as much detailed consideration as you give particularly chapter 9. I've also included some AWS checklists and 2 of the SLAs for you to have a look at. So these are again worth browsing so you know what's involved in them and what's included. Another item that I've put in there is the AWS Simple Monthly Calculator. And this allows you to look at how do we organise and how do we calculate how much it's going to cost. Right? Fairly simple and straightforward. Have a play with it. Put some figures in and select some things, see what you think. It'll give you an idea of how this works. One of the things that's hardly ever mentioned in textbooks though is the fact that you need to plan for growth. I suppose this comes out of my experience as an architect. We're always looking at, what's next? How do we plan for growth? How do we do things? And so one of the things we'll look at, particularly in the lecture, is some of the aspects of planning for growth, and some of the aspects we think that you really need to consider are things like enterprise readiness, security, networks, and design and development, not just of your applications, but also of your infrastructure, right? So it's a little bit more complex than just thinking, oh, I've got to design a new app. We may have to think about how do we design the infrastructure, and the monitoring and that we get out of our cloud management may well start to give us clues that tells us it might be time to start considering changing the way in which we do infrastructure in the cloud. So some areas of consideration for you here. Remote administration is another topic we'll look at, and this is where those AWS checklists really come into play. That's another item you need to put away in your EndNote so that you can use it later on, because you'll constantly come back to them. So in this part of the topic, we're looking at all the different portals, tools and resources and interfaces that allow you as an admin to access the cloud and the different resources, to configure them, to administer them. And it also includes the self-service portals where consumers, which can also be your end users, your users within the organization, can come in and set up services for themselves. So you need to consider that. You'll also need to remember that if you're allowing your consumers to do that, once they do that, that's actually added to your organization's account and then their provision. So we'll look at some aspects of remote administration. We'll also look at resource management. And because the fact that you shoved it into the cloud doesn't free you from some of the issues that are involved in resource management. It might be now automated for you a fair bit. However, you still need to monitor it to make sure you're only using exactly what you actually need. And this also ties back into SLA management. So again, we're talking about this monitoring and analysing data. So, don't think that, as a cloud admin, you'll have plenty of time to put your feet on your desk and sip coffee. there's a lot of work to be done here, and a lot of it is monitoring and analysing to see just what's happening and how it's working. So in the SLA management topic, part of the topic, we'll look at what's involved here, because we know SLA management, we collect some performance data. These are based on some predefined metrics that we may have worked out with the provider beforehand, and some predefined reporting parameters. But you'll get near real-time reporting on usage, on your admin, on the quality of service, and any violations against the SLA. And so this is where you need to start looking at fairly well about how do we do this. I've also included a subtopic in the lecture on SLA governance. So that will give you some further ideas about how to formalise that process so that you can run it, particularly if you start to put a fair amount of stuff in the cloud. Billing management. Now, this is probably the first time that you'll have to start to collect and analyse usage data particularly for business units. And one of the reasons you're doing that is to determine that you're only using the resources that you really need. It may also be that your enterprise decides for the first time they're going to start to charge those business units for that resource usage. And this could well become a quite critical part of a successful cloud migration. Why? And I'll leave this question for you to think about, because it's a really interesting question. Why would charging your business units suddenly become critical to a successful cloud migration? And could you explain that fact to your chief information officer and or your chief financial officer? So that's one of the things we want to try and get out of that. So there's something to think about. It's an interesting conversation when you do eventually get to have it. So how's this all fit together? Well, again, we're meeting a couple of learning outcomes here. We're meeting again that learning outcome of planning business requirements to plan migrations, because we're now looking at it from the management side of things. But we're also meeting another requirement, another learning outcome, where we are able to compare and critique service level agreements to meet the business requirements for that cloud computing plan. So we're really starting to hit the mark pretty hard here. Again, this topic is going to be of great assistance to you when you're trying to complete assignment 4, because amongst a lot of other things, you've got to discuss the plan to conduct remote administration, resource management, SLA management. So that comes into play here as well. Of course, it's also going to be in the exam. There will be some questions possibly around that. Most importantly, though, this is knowledge you'll constantly use in the workplace, and you'll develop it as you constantly manage your workplace's deployment into the cloud. Once more, as always, guys, if you have any questions, please possibly raise them on the discussion board or raise them with your lecturer. We'll be more than happy to help you sort out the problems that you might have. See you again soon.